Okay, welcome back to the Taliesin's map deity chart live streams, where we are making good progress through our deity chart that we have here. And I will just pull up what we are working on for today. So as you can see, we're looking at the thunder god today, and that is, in Vedic terms, the god Indra. Um, Indra is one of these very prominent gods that everyone seems to know something about, at least the basics. So, um, along with that, of course, that helps with familiarity, but also there are things that may be misconceptions. There may be unexpected details and things that we can hopefully dive into and perhaps clarify, or at least discuss with each other to get a clear idea of Indra in terms of comparative mythology, in terms of his equivalencies and parallels to the other branches and over into Europe and all of that. So, yeah, Indra in the Vedas is one of the most prominent gods. And this is one of those things where we discussed recently how when you look at Dyaush and the common equivalence between Dyaush, that is sky in the Vedas, and if you this common equivalence between Dyaush and Zeus in terms of um, linguistics, in terms of their names and the etymologies, uh, this can be skewed by this can actually be skewed by prioritizing the Vedic material too much. Because when we look at those two, we can see that something has changed significantly between that connection there. One or the other side, the Greek or the Vedic, has changed something in terms of the naming very profoundly that has caused this confusion between them. And actually, when you look a lot closer, as we discussed last time in that topic, it actually seems like the Sanskrit, the Vedic, is what has changed their naming convention more profoundly, thus changing kind of the picture of their god in the process, or at least how that name is used. It seems that Sanskrit is the outlier in the Dyaush name, in that type of name, that they have applied it differently. That's one theory, obviously. That's just one way to read the evidence. But they seem to be this outlier in using this type of name to call their embodied sky or embodied heavens deity. And so that things like that tell us that even though the Vedas are this foundation piece for comparative mythology, easily one of the most important bodies of tradition and textual bodies to use for comparative mythology, because it's so ancient and so full and you know more or less complete, in a sense at least, that it is this foundation piece that we always are referring back to and even using as one of the first reference points. But actually there are key points where the Vedic material, even though it's recording things from 1500 BC or 1000 BC, in that range, they've already you can see by comparison with other branches that even they have already started to innovate or introduce changes, or at least in certain ways they are the outlier in certain things. And so when we see Indra, he's this thunder deity actually, and he is actually one of the most prominent deities in the Rig Veda. And it's hard to say. I think it's hard to say that he's the most prominent, because you have figures like Agni is so prominent, and you have like even Soma has this certain intense prominence, and then you have like Varuna as potentially this uh, more centrally a sovereign deity, Mitra Varuna, when they're combined, especially. So you have that, but then Indra really does have this extreme prominence, where you could make an argument that Indra is like the focal point deity, that is hailed so many times in the specific context that they really care about in the Rig Veda and that sort of thing. So he has this intense prominence, and it makes some people think, of course, that Indra might be the same as Zeus because of that intense prominence, just a different understanding of the Zeus type. And of course, we've gone into why Mitra Varuna is actually this far more specific, direct parallel to Zeus and Jupiter. Actually, that there was this type called, or considered as the sovereign type, the sovereign god itself, embodying the kingship and all of that. And so, what Dumézil and others, following Dumézil especially, have gone into is the fact that Indra is not originally the god embodying sovereignty. Now, again, in the Rig Veda, it seems that he has been given an intense prominence, and with that, signs of sovereignty have absolutely been attached to him. He is represented in connection to sovereignty and all of that. But we're trying to trace back to before the Rig Veda. We're trying to trace back to the roots, the Indo-European roots that give rise to the Rig Veda, and seeing where the Rig Veda even has innovated and changed things, right? And so this Indra question is one of these key things. You have to understand what even the Rig Veda has begun to change at that early time for them. So anyways, equating Zeus to Mitra Varuna helps to paint that picture. We see that there was this god Mitra who seems to have been given a reduced prominence. He's been pushed aside somewhat. You have Varuna in the Vedas. He's still pretty prominent, but he's being overtaken in importance by Indra, it seems. And yeah, there really seems to be this intense centering around Indra. One of the arguments to show that is what is happening in terms of what Dumézil goes into is that he goes to the Mahabharata, the incarnated gods in the Mahabharata, the heroes, that is the Pandavas, the Pandava brothers. He makes the argument, as does Stig Vikander, who he's kind of like a colleague of and building off of Stig Vikander's work, and they are kind of influencing each other. But they go into how the Pandavas, this group of these brothers and their father also, they actually give a preserved picture of the canonical pantheon of gods from before the Rig Vedic period, is his argument. And that the picture preserved as if in amber in these divine heroes actually tells us a picture that is more or less, give or take, what the Indo-Iranic tradition pantheon would have looked like around 1800 BCE. So before the split of the Iranic and the Vedic, they are arguing that the picture of the brothers and the father, the Pandavas, is preserving the sort of distinction and the hierarchy of the gods from that time before the Rig Veda. So when you triangulate, as we've discussed, you triangulate the Iranic material with the Rig Veda itself, and the Vedic material, and then you triangulate that with the epic material, especially the Mahabharata, but other stuff as well. When you do that, you see that the Rig Veda has these differences that look like innovations from this, from where the Mahabharata and the Iranic material actually agrees. That points to that being the earlier material of the root before Iranic and Vedic split. So that tells you that the core sovereign figure among the brothers is actually Yudhishthira, and also his father Pandu. Pandu would be the Varuna type, as we've discussed, the first sovereign. His son Yudhishthira is this Dharma type, who he equates with Mitra most prominently, right? We've gone into all this. I hope if people are not following along, I hope they'll go back and watch the streams on Mitra especially. And so that tells you that the main sovereigns in this more archaic picture, this carefully preserved archaic picture of the gods preserved in the epic heroes, that finds a greater agreement with what is going on in parallel branches, that shows the Mitra type as the second, culminating sovereign in Yudhishthira. And then as Yudhishthira's younger brother, actually, you have Arjuna, who is said to be the incarnation of Indra. So Arjuna, aka the incarnation of Indra, is this younger brother position in relation to the actual leading sovereigns. And Arjuna is, of course, the most incredible warrior. He has incredible power. He has a unique role, and even a sort of totality sense. He has an esoteric sense that he can embody this totality in his own way. This he has connections to the immense power of the Godhead and all of that in himself too. But he is in this specified warrior caste role, you would say. That's how Dumasil describes it. That you have the sovereign representatives, Yudhishthira, that's like the Zeus, and then you have his younger brothers, including the incarnation of the Thunderer, and that is the warrior caste god. Dumasil calls this the second function rather than the first function, which is the sovereign. And then he puts the other brother, which is Bhima. Bhima is this other brother and incarnating the wind god, and the wind god is Vayu. And so he says that from this picture of the gods and other material, you can see that the wind god incarnation and the thunder god incarnation are seen as the two representatives of the warrior caste function specifically. So they have a specific role within the society of the gods, and it is not to be the full sovereign. It is to be the representative of like the warrior nobles of society, and so like the kshatriyas of the Vedic society, of course. And that has two prominent aspects, which are like the brutish wind god and the more, he says, Dumasil says, the more aristocratic and skilled thunder warrior, which is Arjuna. So when you look at it that way, you also see that the wind god and the thunder god are like two sides of one face of the ultimate like warrior god. That becomes important in the parallels, which we'll go into. But he says, that picture gives you this clear split between the wind and thunder deity that becomes less clear in other places. But it shows you that they did have this concept of the wind god, who's more brutish, more just raw power, and then the thunder god, who's more represents a more aristocratic, skilled type of warfare, and also perhaps more moodiness that is connected to like the storms, thunderstorms, and that sort of thing, plausibly at least. And okay, so that tells us a bit about where we're starting from, which is arguably based on the Dumasilian arguments and his school of thought. There is this concept that we can get a peek into what the pantheon of the Indo-Iranic 1800 BCE period looked like by doing this triangulation of the data, and that can give us a peek into what the pantheon looked like leading into the Rig Veda. And then you can see from there, actually, the Mitra Varuna figures are like originally the sovereigns, and Indra is actually the second function warrior god, who's then overtaking everybody in prominence and centrality. But that does not mean necessarily and automatically that he was the original most important god, or like actually first and foremost the king, the sovereign, and all of that. So that's really important, I think, to understand that basis. Yeah, that is a pretty clear starting point, right, Arno? What do you think about that in particular?
Yeah, that's pretty clear.
Okay. And then from there we can get into just like, how can we see if this is happening? Then it leads to some confusions, because I think it opens these obvious possibilities that Indra is blending into himself, taking into himself what had been previously like Mitra type myths. That's a possibility. As Mitra gets pushed aside, Indra could overtake some of those roles. What Dumasil then argues is that even Indra himself, because he's becoming prominent, and then because of what we said about the wind god and the thunder god are like two faces of one warrior caste divine representative. Dumasil implies and even says outright that sometimes Indra in himself is like Indra slash Vayu in one. So he's like the ultimate warrior, combining the wind power and the thunder divine power in one. And so therefore, it's conceivable that he is paralleling or embodying even the wind mythos at times, even though Vayu also has his own separate mythos. So that becomes another complication you have to be aware of, at least while you're making these comparisons. But as a jumping off point, I think we should go into one or two hymns of Indra to give a good idea of the actual material that we're dealing with. Okay, so that works. And here we have Rig Veda 1.32. And this is one of the central, most crucial Indra hymns. And yeah, let's see. Would you like to read this hymn to get us going here, Arno? By chance?
Sure I can.
Okay.
I will declare the manly deeds of Indra, the first that he achieved, the thunder wielder. He slew the dragon, then disclosed the waters, and cleft the channels of the mountain torrents. He slew the dragon lying on the mountain, his heavenly bolt of thunder Tvashtar fashioned. Like lowing kine in rapid flow, descending the water, glided downward to the ocean. Impetuous as a bull, he chose the soma, and in 3 sacred beakers drank the juices. Maghavan grasped the thunder for his weapon, and smote to death this firstborn of the dragons. When, Indra, thou hast slain the dragon's firstborn, and overcome the charms of the enchanters, then, giving life to sun and dawn and heaven, thou foundest not one foe to stand against thee. Indra with his own great and deadly thunder smote into pieces Vritra, worst of Vritras. As trunks of trees, what time the axe hath felled them, low on the earth so lies the prostrate dragon. He, like a mad weak warrior, challenged Indra, the great impetuous, many-slaying hero. He, brooking not the clashing of the weapons, crushed Indra's foe, the shattered forts in falling. Footless and handless, still he challenged Indra, who smote him with his bolt between the shoulders. Emasculate, yet claiming manly vigor, thus Vritra lay, with scattered limbs dissevered. There as he lies in a bank-bursting river, the waters, taking courage, flow above him. The dragon lies beneath the feet of torrents which Vritra, with his greatness, had encompassed. Then humbled was the strength of Vritra's mother. Indra hath cast his deadly bolt against her. The mother was above, the son was under, and like a cow beside her calf lay Danu. Rolled in the midst of never ceasing. Whoops.
Oops, sorry about that. Okay. Here we go. Rolled in the midst there.
Rolled in the midst of never ceasing currents, flowing without a rest forever onward. The waters bear off Vritra's nameless body. The foe of Indra sank to during darkness. Guarded by Ahi stood the thralls of Dasas. The waters stayed like kine held by the robber. But he, when he had smitten Vritra, opened the cave wherein the floods had been imprisoned. A horse's tail was thou, when he, O Indra, smote on thy bolt. Thou, God without a second, thou hast won back the kine, hast won the soma, thou hast let loose to flow the 7 rivers. Nothing availed him, lightning, nothing thunder, hailstorm or mist had spread around him. When Indra and the dragon strove in battle, Maghavan gained the victory forever. Whom sawest thou to avenge the dragon, Indra? The fear possessed thy heart when thou hadst slain him, that, like a hawk affrighted, through the regions, thou crossedst 99 flowing rivers. Indra is king of all that moves and moves not, of creatures tame and horned, the thunder wielder. Over all living men he rules as sovereign, containing all as spokes within the felly.
All right. Yeah, that last part you can really see where he's being given the sovereign emphasis. He's being placed in the sovereign role, like the spokes within the felly. That's a very Vedic image of centrality, right? Containing all. Yeah. So yeah, what are your impressions from this? What does it make you think of first?
So, in every place that it calls him sovereign, that's what you're talking about with like the matriarch inheritance. But I mean, I'll try to focus on the Indra specific stuff. So he's a god of
Yeah.
excessive manliness, and
Mhm.
he's called like without equal. He's also seen as in the way that he's freeing um what is it, like luminaries and other like celestial gods or goddesses from these imprisoning
Right.
dragons.
Right.
He's seen as like a very dangerous force in the middle sky, where he's giving life to sun and dawn and heaven, and
Mhm.
also freeing the waters. Um, and this is specifically going over his it's summarizing one of many times it does is this narrative myth where he has a conflict with Vritra, which I think certain details stick out that can line up with other gods and even heroes like Beowulf. But it's
Right. Exactly.
essentially,
I was gonna say like this. I was wondering if it jumps out to you as well that this just like it looks like it could be a description of the battle in Beowulf almost because of so many similarities. It's just fascinating.
yeah, one thing I will say that seems to be something that doesn't pop up in some European examples. Maybe with Gaelic stuff it does, but the liberation of the waters does occur with like Python and all that. But the freeing of the waters or the freeing of the kine during these battles mostly appears in like Rig Veda or like Indo-Iranian kind of sources. Um, you have an aquatic layer where Beowulf battles with Grendel's mother, and then and all that, but you don't have this like cosmogonic outcome of the freeing of the waters or the kind. Um,
Hmm.
so,
Yeah, that's a good point.
but there's a lot. Well, I can comment on what you have up on screen too,
Hmm.
with one of Thor's names being Einrithi, which means lone rider. It could, after reading this hymn to Indra, it could have the nuance of he has no second, like he is one. He is alone in his
Hmm.
physical and manly prowess,
Hmm.
but um, Thor specifically is one of these other gray areas where the thunder and wind god
Hmm.
become less distinguished, like you were saying earlier. And
Yeah.
Josephus, he's not here with us, but I have heard him hypothesize that a name like Einrithi would be um, describing a more wind god aspect of Thor, because one of the things that Josephus noticed between thunder warriors and wind gods um, is that the wind god is usually a lone warrior. He does not have a retinue of warriors that would symbolize storm clouds like the thunder god does, whether it's Achilles and his
Mm.
Myrmidons or Indra and the Maruts.
Right. That's a good point.
Um, so it could be either.
No, yeah, yeah, that's a great point. Interesting. So, yeah, I personally, as people know if they've read my articles or anything like that, yeah, I see Thor as heavily, heavily wind god as well, and And then it's one of these things where clearly he has a connection to thunder and lightning, but it's like sometimes it's hard to really pinpoint the definite associated myths and things that are really thunder related, except for, of course, the slaying of the serpent. So he does have, but he very much blends those groups of myths and roles. And I think when you look at enough branches of this material, you start to see that it's not really like, oh, that's just a late conflation of things necessarily. It's almost like because of the consistency of it, maybe even the Proto-Indo-Europeans had a concept of like the higher unity of the thunder and wind um, storm deities as kind of like two sides of a higher unity already. So I think that's something to keep in mind as a possibility. Um, yeah. So from there, yeah, like the Beowulf thing, you even have it's talking about Vritra's mother, and it's very like you just to me just like Grendel's mother just pops into your head when you read this. Even footless and handless, like Indra has cut off the feet and hands of Vritra as he's fighting him, but he's still battling. And of course, Beowulf tears off the arm of Grendel, right? And it's this similar image. And then Indra famously, prominently, like emasculates Vritra. So actually, like gelds him in the battle. As you can deduce from that, and that becomes one of these famous elements of the story in the Veda that Vritra has become, his limbs and even his manhood has been cut apart, cut off by Indra, and that's what Indra does. Yeah, it's fascinating to me to this hymn and just how much it brings to mind Beowulf personally. Let's see if there's another one I can pull up real quick to give us some more information about Indra. Maybe 419. I'm going to try. Thee verily, O thunder-wielding Indra, all the gods hear, the helpers swift to listen, and both the worlds elected thee, the mighty, high, waxen strong, alone to slaughter Vritra. The gods, as worn withheld, relaxed their efforts. Thou, Indra, born of truth, wast sovereign ruler. Thou slewest Ahi, the serpent, who besieged the waters, and duggest out their all-supporting channels. The insatiate one, extended hard to waken, who slumbered in perpetual sleep, O Indra. The dragon stretched against the seven prone rivers, where no joint was, thou rentest with thy thunder. Indra with might shook earth and her foundation, as the wind stirs the water with its fury. He burst asunder and tore away the summits of the mountains. He set us free, obstructed rivers. Okay, let's see. It's kind of, you can see that it's a basic, well-known story that they repeat a lot. This is the ancient and accepted pathways by which all gods have come into existence. Hereby could one be born, though waxen mighty. Let him not otherwise destroy his mother. Not this. So that first line, very cryptic, is talking about the accepted pathway by which gods have come into existence. I think it's talking about like the pathway of the birth canal, the divine birth canal, perhaps, because this is kind of a mystical hymn about the birth of Indra. Let him not otherwise destroy his mother. Not this way go I forth. Hard is the passage. Forth from the side obliquely will I issue. I think it's talking about Indra. I will issue out of my mother. Much that is yet undone must I accomplish. One must I combat, and the other question. He bent his eye upon the dying mother, My word I now withdraw. That way I follow. In Tvashtar's dwelling, Indra drank the soma, 100 worth of juice pressed from the mortar. What strange act shall he do, he whom his mother bore for 1,000 months and many autumns? No peer hath he among those born already, nor among those who shall be born hereafter. Deeming him a reproach, his mother hid him, Indra, endowed with all heroic valor. Then up he sprang himself, assumed his vesture, and filled as soon as born the earth and heaven. With lively motion onward flow these waters, the holy ones, shouting as 'twere together. Ask them to tell thee what the floods are saying. What girdling rock the waters burst asunder? Are they addressing him with words of welcome? Will the floods take on them the shame of Indra? With his great thunderbolt, my son. So now it's like the mother speaking suddenly in this moment. With his great thunderbolt, my son hath slaughtered Vritra and set these rivers free to wander. I cast thee from me, mine, thy youthful mother, thee mine own offspring, Kusava hath swallowed. To him mine infant were the waters gracious. Indra my son rose up in conquering vigor. Thou art mine, O Magavan, whom Vyamsa struck to the ground and smote thy jaws in pieces. But smitten through the mastery, thou wonnest, and with thy bolt the Dasa's head thou crushest. The heifer hath brought forth the strong, the mighty, the unconquerable bull, the furious Indra. The mother left her unlicked calf to wander, seeking himself the path that he would follow. And then, my son, the deities forsake thee. About to slaughter Vritra, O my friend Vritra, stride full boldly forward. Who was he then who made thy mother widow? Who sought to stay thee lying still or moving? What god, when by the foot thou thy sire tookest and slewest, was at hand to give thee comfort? In deep distress, I cooked a dog's intestines. So it's switching all around, but the Jameson and Brereton say this is Indra talking at this moment. In deep distress, I cooked a dog's intestines. Among the gods, I found not one to comfort. My consort I beheld in degradation. The falcon then brought me the pleasant soma. So, okay, very cryptic. It's switching speakers a lot in there. But what's interesting here is it's describing the birth of Indra, and it's describing it as though he is bursting the rock of obstruction, even when he's bursting out of his mother. So even his birth prefigures his role as the one who breaks the obstruction and releases the waters, even the waters of his mother's waters during his birth are prefigured there, and so he's performing that feat even in birth. I just thought that's fascinating. And then we can see that the sin of Vritra is already present in the Rig Veda in this hymn and in other mentions as well. So this concept of the sin that Indra incurs when he slays Vritra, it's elaborated more in like the Brahmanas, but it's already in the Rig Veda, and so that's important comparatively to know and to see. We have let's see, what shame rather, talks about the shame, I think. Where was that? Girdling rocks, and then will the floods take on them the shame of Indra, right after talking about breaking the girdling rock apart. Indra has a shame that he's trying, that the floods, that's the waters, the mother is asking the waters to take away the shame of Indra for what he's done. That's clearly the motif in the later stories of Indra's sin that he incurs from killing Vritra, which is releasing the waters. Indra incurs a sin that he tries to wash off in the waters, specifically in that story, in which he ultimately, over time, does wash off the sin. But it's right here in the Rig Veda. And also, what else? There's mentions of him making his mother a widow, I think, or someone makes his mother a widow. But in any case, we then have, the mention of Indra's jaw, right? This is, thou art my own, O Magavan, whom Vyamsa struck to the ground and smote thy jaws to pieces, but but then you destroyed his head. So this is the motif where Indra is fighting Vritra, and Vritra actually breaks Indra's jaw in the fight, and then finally Indra defeats him in the end, so comes back and defeats him. So that is a crucial detail, that there is actually this back and forth where, first of all, Indra gets his jaw broken, and there's actually there's at least one other Rig Veda hymn where it mentions this explicitly, that Vritra breaks the jaw of Indra while they're fighting. And then we also have Indra incurring shame, and then finding being forsaken by the deities, right here, right? So my son, these deities forsake thee. Also, so this goes along with the shame that he's incurred. He has to stride out into his aloneness in the wilderness, or whatever he does, because the deities have forsaken him. And then this ties in, according to Jameson and Brereton, this ties into Indra then cooking dogs' intestines while he's in distress, basically forsaken by the gods. So he's forced out into the wild from his shame or sin that he's incurred, right? And no one will be there. No one is there to give him comfort. So he cooks a dog's intestines to feed himself during that time, in this Vedic version of the story. And then finally, to bring things to the conclusion, the falcon brings him Soma, and this kind of completes the story. He's kind of being revitalized, seemingly at the end, by the Soma, right? So all of that is fascinating because we'll see this motif in parallel branches. Yeah, where there is this back and forth in the battle with the serpent, involving the serpent sort of getting the upper hand at first, and even causing injury or causing something to the thunderer god. And then even, there's like an intermediate period where they don't fight for a while, and kind of, well, we'll see, at least in the Irish version, the figure, the thunderer figure, is kind of living in a weird state of shame from the injury he's incurred in the battle, at least. So I don't know if that connects to that shame wilderness wandering period in the Vedic one or not, but it's similar. Then finally he returns and slays the serpent, or the water monster, or what have you. And then interesting. So it's a good question. It's an interesting question to ask, really, like, which details really align, because we see in, like, the story of Thor and also the Irish version, that there's this first encounter with the serpent. The serpent kind of gets the upper hand in some way, causing some detriment to the Thunder Warrior. There's an intermediary period, and then in the kind of later times, at the conclusion of their story, there's a second battle with the serpent or water monster, and the thunder figure defeats the serpent, but doing so essentially will kill him. In the Western versions we have, actually kills him. In this Vedic version, he incurs sin. He incurs sin from killing Vritra, we can see, and shame, rather than dying. So that's interesting. So it makes me wonder, like, if things have just been shifted around a little bit, or things are just being told a little bit differently in each version. What do you think of that? How would you connect any of those particular details, Arno, in any different ways?
Oh, the particular details of what you were just highlighting here to other myths?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think the clearest one is Fargus MacLeity, which is probably what you were winking at. So you're highlighting that. So, well, I'll preface going into it with the sort of reconstruction of Chaos Kampf myths in the first place. So he's like, that was it's like the main myth type
Okay, sounds good.
or myth theme that Indo-European reconstructionists were first recognizing, that there's this like weather god who is battling some monster or serpent, and it's like a battle between order and chaos. But it's not untrue. It's just a lot more nuanced than that, because Zeus versus Typhon was included with um, like Thor and Jormungandr's battles, and this one Indra and Vritra. When in reality, each um, each manly celestial god seems to have their own unique chaos conf battle with um, a destructive force that has its own narrative sequence and unique details. And Fergus MacLeithe's, or the saga of Fergus MacLeithi versus the Muirdris, is probably the clearest and closest to one with this example given with Indra, and Beowulf is another. You highlighted Indra having his jaws broken and also being given a sin. There are other versions. I don't have the citations for the hymns in the Rig Veda, but that sin is put on him by what I believe was called a Brahmana woman who shames him after he has slain Vritra and destroyed his fortresses.
Mm-hmm,
Um, Something very similar happens with Fergus MacLeithi. He enters this lake where this Muirdris is, and at the sight of it, his jaw wrenches all the way to the back of his skull. And when he leaves the waters, there is an old woman who scorns him for it. And he doesn't return for 7 years, and his face is deformed from this event. And everyone in the kingdom where he rules, I believe it's Connacht, I don't remember, banishes mirrors from his presence so that he never finds this out. And then 7 years later, he finally returns, and then he battles with the Muirdris under the water for I don't know how many days, maybe you remember, until the lake turns red and he emerges victorious, and then proclaims victory and then falls dead after stepping forward a few times, which evokes images of Thor um, in his Ragnarok battle with Jormungandr, which is his second. That's one of the things with Thunder God in particular. His Chaos Conf takes place in two events. He has two battles. One where sometimes he's naked, sometimes he's unarmed, sometimes he's caught off guard or just unprepared. But that's the same kind of every time the Thunder God first encounters the aquatic serpent that he ends up mutually killing, um, he is unprepared in some way, and
right.
then battles him a second time. And yeah, you pulled up the saga of
Yeah,
Sargus MacLeithi right here.
yeah. So whole day and night. We've got yeah, we can see here a whole, they Loch Ruri, for a whole day and night, the loch seethed from the contest between him and the Murderish, and the surge of its waves kept coming, and then holding the head of the monster. So the Ulith saw him, and he said to them, I am the survivor. Thereupon he sank down dead, and for a whole month the loch remained red from the battle. So yeah, it's interesting what you mentioned about the woman. I was trying to find the exact passage there, which is a little tricky, but there's like a bondwoman. There's different things, but absolutely, what you said was spot on there, because yeah, he has an initial encounter where he's swimming in the lake, and he goes under the water and encounters the sight of the Murderish, and apparently it frightens him so much that it twists his jaw backwards. Right? That's basically what the effect is, that it specifically twists his jaw backwards. Is his forget how it phrases it here.
It says it wrenches to the back to his occiput, which is like
His
the back of your
occiput.
skull.
Yeah, exactly. So that's fun.
So it's essentially just it wrenched all the way back and basically
There it is.
almost off. Yeah.
There it is. Okay. Fearful water monster. At the sight of it, his mouth was wrenched back as far as his occiput, and he came out on land in terror. He said to the charioteer, "How do I appear to thee?" So it's interesting. And then thinking that, yeah, I just hadn't noticed this woman thing that you mentioned, so I was trying to track that down because that's interesting as well. One of the ways in the like Brahmana material, the Brahmana versions, it is that the sin itself, I forget if it's Brahmahatya or something like that. It's the word for, the slaying of a Brahmin, and I don't know the exact word, something like Brahmahatya. It is embodied in a woman who like follows after Indra, like hanging over him, this sin, this horrible sin, and so Indra like is brought low by this horrible sin embodied in this otherworldly woman, and then he finally goes in the waters and all of that. And there's a lot of different versions, of course. So I don't know if maybe that's the version or if there was a different one with a woman like cursing him with sin for what he's done. It could be kind of like different versions of the same, right?
Yeah, I do remember reading it. I would have liked to have had it prepared, but
Yeah. Sorry about that. That's all right.
I've only noticed it in the Rig Veda and with Fergus MacLeity.
Okay. It's in the Rig Veda too then. Yeah. Very interesting. We'll have to look that up.
But yeah, something about the difference between the thunder god and the wind gods. Chaos comps or battles with either serpents or monsters. The thunder gods liberates the waters. But when you were going over Andagda's battle with that octopus, he was like pushing the waters back and revealing the land of Mythstream, if I remember correctly.
Yes.
So it seems like the both of them, like the thunder god would be responsible for the rising tide and the wind god for the receding tide.
That's fascinating.
And, yeah. We do see in the Utgard Loki myth with Thor drinking the the ocean through the horn that he's responsible for the tides in general.
That's true. That's a good point. Yeah. Because I think of that as like a Indra myth, the humbling of the thunderer, basically, right? But it could have already blended motifs of his different roles already in there in that tradition. That would make perfect sense. So we have here, I'll just read this and see if there's anything of interest in this section. But yeah, they hide the mirrors from Fergus MacLeity or MacLeitja, and we have, one day he told his bond maid to wash his head. Thinking that the woman was too slow, he gave her a blow with his whip. Resentment overcame her and she taunted him to his face with his blemish. Okay, that's interesting, right? So the woman, you have this woman here shouting at him his blemish, which is like his curse. It's like the physical representation of some curse that has been inflicted on him by the serpent. So that's certainly a possible parallel, I would say, right? And then he gives her a blow with his sword and cut her in two, and then that triggers him having to go directly to the lake to confront and finally overcome this monster that has inflicted this curse on him. So I could definitely see that, right?
That's where I thought of Beowulf first, because he has that first encounter with the monster and then slays that woman and then faces the monster.
Hey, that's really strong too, I think. Okay, so and we've gone into before, right? The pattern with Thor, of course, is he goes and encounters Jormungandr for the first time. He goes out in the boat and he's trying to fish, or they're trying to fish for Jormungandr or whatever. They're trying to pull him up. And then how exactly does that play out?
So yeah, that's when Thor and Tyr visit Hymir's house for the goal of taking his cauldron of ale for Aegir's feast. But Hymir is said to be Tyr's likely father. Thor drinks copious amounts of mead at Hymir's house, and they go fishing to get enough fish to satiate Thor's hunger. And he uses an ox head as bait, and Jormungandr is what the bait catches. They weren't expecting to get Jormungandr. And Thor is struggling with Jormungandr, and his foot is pulled through the bottom of the boat that he's in with Hymir. And Jormungandr is able to get away. And then Thor strikes Hymir dead. I don't remember exactly if it's like Hymir was setting him up to be attacked by Jormungandr, which is very similar to what Tvashtar does with Indra, because Indra slayed Tvashtar's son Vishvarupa, who was a three-headed serpent reading the Vedas, and he slew it in a very similar way that Heracles does the Hydra. And then Tvashtar was angry at this and created Vritra to get revenge on Indra and invited him to his home and got him drunk on Soma to try and make him vulnerable to die by Vritra. And that's when he battles Vritra and slays him. So
Right. Yep.
it's
And then of course
sometimes it gets a little sorry, yeah, you can go.
Well, I just wanted to conclude that just with that first encounter with Thor results in Jormungandr getting the best of Thor and pulling his foot through the boat rather than directly fully injuring. Like we have these two versions, the Vedic and the Irish, which really strongly connect the jaw being like twisted or broken. Like that's amazing already. Then we do have in this Thor version that his foot is pulled through the boat instead. Like maybe that's in the place of the injury, I would think, more or less, of course. And then, he's got basically the outcome is Thor has kind of been made a fool of by the serpent, or just, he's gotten the best of him. He's made him seem the weaker in that confrontation. And so ultimately Thor has to have his comeback and finally defeat the serpent that got the best of him in the end times. And when he does, he kills Jormungandr at Ragnarok, but then he takes how many steps away and falls dead from killing from the venom or whatever of the blood or whatever of Jormungandr.
Yes, it takes 9, but that's a very
9
common
mm-hmm.
number that's just inserted all the time in Norse mythology.
Right. Right. So it's really identical to this Fergus MacLetti story in its framework, right? They have that final confrontation with and the thunderer figure emerges, but then just falls dead essentially from his victory. So you can see that that's the same with maybe the foot going through the boat being a different variation of the way, whatever the serpent has inflicted on the thunderer, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah. And was there more you wanted to add to the Thor picture there that I interrupted?
Well, just that it's like you have an encounter with a serpent in an aquatic environment, right. I guess, but that was already obvious.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that is crucial. It's interesting. Like the releasing of the waters isn't really made explicit in either of these Western versions, is it?
It's not, no.
Right. So that's interesting.
I don't even think in Heracles' version it is. But yeah, in Greek myth, it's Apollo slaying Python that liberates the waters, but that's
but different type of thing. That's interesting to note in terms of what has changed, or at least just become more implicit or esoteric, perhaps. Maybe people just understood what
Yeah.
the myth was supposed to mean.
One small thing I can add about the Western versus Eastern examples of the thunder god is that in the East, whether it's Slavic or Baltic or Indian, the thunder god seems to be the king, and he survives
Mhm.
even the final battle with the serpent.
Right,
That even
right,
affects
right.
folklore. There's Dobrynya, and he battles as May. Into it follows the same narrative pattern, but he survives the final battle just like Indra does,
Hmm.
because the thunder god is the king to those people. But in the West, we know that Fargus mac Roich, who
Hmm.
is essentially the same as Fargus mac Leti,
Hmm.
just with a different cycle, and Heracles are both explicitly denied or tricked out of the kingship. Um, that's not necessarily true of Thor, Mars, and the surviving material we have, but they are very explicitly second
Right.
to the king.
Yeah, great point. Great point. That's a strong connection between Heracles and Fergus. And yeah, we should emphasize that as well, that Fergus mac Roic and Fergus mac Legia are considered interchangeable, or that at least scholars have already theorized that they may have come theoretically from an original. They may be doublets within the legendary material, and that makes sense in comparative terms, very much so, because then we also have Fergus mac Roic fighting Conchobar. And I've shown in this more extended argument about that humbling of Indra motif, I've shown that actually what Fergus mac Roic does when he attacks Conchobar, it has many of the same exact motifs as when Thor is like striking Screamir, right? That's the
Yes.
giant in the Utgartha Loki story. So Screamir is this disguised aspect of Utgartha Loki himself. He takes the form of this giant named Screamir, and then Thor strikes his hammer blows on the head of Screamir, but every time he hits the head of Screamir just he's like, oh, was that a leaf falling on my head? um, and then later at the conclusion of the story, Thor learns from Utgartha Loki that it was really him all along, in disguise there, and he was doing illusion magic to trick Thor, because every time Thor would swing his hammer down at his head, he would redirect somehow the hammer of Thor, or he would bring the mountains over. I can't remember if he redirects the hammer to the mountains or he brings the mountains closer. He probably redirects the hammer, right? Um,
Yeah, he
but
redirects them, yes, and it's three successive
right,
blows.
3 successive blows exactly. He redirects them each time, and so they cause these indentations in the mountain side, basically, right? In any case, yeah, he causes him to strike the mountains instead. So it's like the power of the thunder is futile, hammering upon this giant, and can't even budge him, and that's very emphasized. It doesn't even move him at all, because he is this too powerful illusionary deity who controls the Maya of the world, so to speak. And that is because it comes back to this Prajapati type god, arguably, or at least some kind of godhead type representation, connected to Prajapati Brahma. And that is what Conchobar is in his role as this centrality figure. And specifically, Fergus mac Roic, when he confronts Conchobar, it talks about him repeatedly striking the shield, this shield of Conchobar, and it doesn't even make it budge a single inch. And he keeps pulling back his sword, drawing back his sword as much as possible, and striking it with his full strength on Conchobar's shield, and not a single budge to the shield. And so that is this same kind of motif that we see with Thor striking futilely at the head of Screamir, right? And then in frustration, I believe, if I'm someone can correct me, I have the details more exactly laid out in my video I made on this, but then in frustration, I believe Fergus swings his sword around and cuts the mountains nearby. So it's this combination of this not budging attack, and then the actual full force of his blows being redirected by himself in this case onto the mountains that are nearby and cutting the mountains. So it is this combination that's uncanny. And when you understand these other alignments of the Fergus name, that he clearly is the Thunderer type and he has other Thunderer myths, then you see that this is he's embodying it in this myth as well. And it is this he's being humbled by the immovable power of this Prajapati type hero, Conchovar, who only really like the illusion power of the godhead can overcome the brute strength of the Thunderer. But even in doing so, it especially in the Thor story, even in his defeat by the cosmic illusion, it emphasizes how strong the Thunderer really is. So it showcases his raw force, even as it can be made a fool of by the illusion, but it's still it brings out his full force and shows how strong he is. Utgartha Loki, of course, is becomes fearful even of the. It's just it scared us how strong you were, even with all our illusions. So. It becomes a positive of a showcase, which is I always found that interesting in those stories.
Yeah, that also highlights another characteristic about the Thunder God, that he's very he's representative of the ego in a way. I don't necessarily want to get too deep into that because that could get really rambly. I did find that old Kumar Swami article from a couple years ago you sent me about it, but that would be a little bit too out of context.
That's a great one. We could reference that. There is a great Ananda Kumar Swami article about Indra as he's like this representative sacrificer. But yeah, what were you going to say about that?
Just so the Thunderer, with his particular set of narrative myths and powers, associations, whatnot, is often used representative of the ego or the individual, especially according to initiatory mystery cults.
Mm-hmm.
Heracles' myth and his death is an apotheosis that's very symbolic of that. Other figures are too.
Right,
it's not just him, but more than once, and even outside of the Indo-European sphere of influence, the heroic, manly thunder god or hero is used as a symbol for the ego, and being humbled is part of its journey. Gore myth earlier, but cool. I hadn't brought that up with you before.
Yeah, tell me if you can. You or James could tell me more about this. Do you have?
Yeah, so
what the glove, is there a connection to that?
I don't remember the glove. I know that Skjaldagor's put in a coffin at the end, but this is kind of it's like a Utgard Loki myth with Thor by himself and no it's just Skrimir. It's not Utgard Loki, or at least the true identity behind the disguise isn't explicitly revealed, which I think to be the case for Heracles and Geryon as well. And this is actually what got me to think about it, but I don't remember exactly. I'd have to I think I'll be able to search it up real quick.
Well, I would.
But you have the same motif of 3 successive blows that gets this giant's attention. Saint Ilya's in the place of Thor.
Right. I think it's 3 successive blows in the Fergus MacRoic story too. I should have added that too. So that was.
And it's also 3 successive blows that gets Geryon's attention when Heracles steals his cattle.
Right.
Because I think it's his guard dog Orthros that he battles, and it's each of Orthros's 3 heads that he hits, the third one finally gets Garyon to wake up, who has 3 heads himself.
Hmm.
But yeah, so there's this, and it's even in Sumerian myths. That was kind of insane that you found a very, very, very old Sumerian poem that had a lot of these details
Right.
in Ninurta and Enki.
I'll see if I can pull that up. It's just amazing to see it. I think it's like it's one of those things that just makes you double take, and you're like, "Am I really seeing this? Right? Am I just seeing what I want to see here, or is this because it all kind of adds up to the same sort of picture?" But it's called Ninurta and the Turtle. I'll just pull it up here.
I did find those little posts about Ilian Sviatogor, so
Cool.
I can read through some of the little summaries after you bring that up.
Okay.
You
Cool.
just
So
did.
yeah. So basically, Ninurta is this warrior god. Kind of, for me, it's hard to pinpoint. It could be this issue of the wind and thunder traits, or just like a general warrior god. And Sumerian stuff is a little difficult to begin with, like exactly which role Ninurta was in. I'm not sure exactly, but he's this warrior connected deity. And what happens is he's, yeah, sort of like threatening to, wanting to take the kingship, I believe, or at least the gods are worried that he's going to come, like, take over the kingship, which again is something that we see with these sort of thunderer type gods. We see it with like Fergus, I think, is a good example, and the others you mentioned, that it happens sometimes with these the warrior god is not supposed to be the first function. He's not really the sovereign. He's like representing the warrior nobles, though. The warrior noble aspect of society, someone from that uh, class or whatever, there's always kind of a threat that they're going to rise up and become the sovereign, and because they embody all this untapped power or whatever, this power that has to be kept below the sovereign, but it could always overtake it, right? So it makes sense that this would become a sort of motif where this type of god, there's this danger that, or this worry among the other gods who are ruling, that he might become the king or whatever. So Enki, who is like the Prajapati type, and this is one of the myths that shows you that, and this is one of the core arguments supporting that he's the Prajapati type. But also, if you begin with that possibility, if you begin and you see there's other material that can support that, it can help you see that this is the same myth type that we've been discussing. In any case, Enki is like this Prajapati type, and he goes to kind of sidetrack Ninurta and stop him from taking over the kingship. And what he does is here. Let's read. The chick Anzu took the hero Ninurta by his hand and drew him to Enki's palace. Enki was delighted with the hero Ninurta. The Lord Nudimud honored him duly. Hero, no god among your brothers could have acted so. As for the bird which your mighty weapon captured, from now to eternity you will keep your foot placed on its neck. May the gods give you heroic strength. And so he's defeated this Anzu chick, and then he's being honored. May your father Enlil do whatever you command. And then monthly may your house regularly receive tributes in the shrine, and may On proclaim your name in the seat of honor. The hero was secretly not happy with these promises. Where he stood, he darkened and yellowed like a flood storm. He contemplated great deeds, and inwardly he was rebellious. So what they're going to give him is clearly not enough for what he thinks he deserves. He wants to take over, perhaps. So he uttered a word which has no, etc. The hero Ninurta set his sights on the whole world. Okay, he told no one, and inwardly did not. The great Lord Enki intuitively grasped the substance of the plan. In the shrine in the Absu, he stirred up a dark floodstorm. So Enki has to humble this god, this warrior god who has shown his great power and now wants to take over the whole world, rule the whole world. By the house, the minister Isimud opposed Ninurta. The hero Ninurta refused to come out and raised his hand against the minister Isimud. Against Ninurta, Enki fashioned a turtle from the clay of the Abzu. Against him, he stationed the turtle at an opening. At the gate of the Abzu, Enki talked to him near the place of the ambush and brought him to the place where the turtle was. The turtle was able to grab Ninurta's tendon from behind. The hero Ninurta managed to turn back its feet. Okay, that's all that has happened in this battle, right? It's like they're wrestling or fighting, and all it says is that the hero Ninurta managed to turn back its feet. But then just doing that causes Enki to have this reaction. Enki, as if perplexed, said, "What is this?" And then he had the turtle scrape the ground with its claws, had it dig an evil pit. The hero Ninurta then fell into it with the turtle. The hero did not know how to get out from this. The turtle kept on gnawing his feet with its claws. So ultimately, it overcomes. So Enki has created some sort of incredibly powerful turtle. As he understands it, it's some incredibly powerful turtle, and ultimately the turtle defeats Ninurta in this battle. It seems to be right, and they kind of like are wrestling or something. They're just grabbing each other. Grabs Ninurta's tendon, and then Ninurta just turns back its feet, and that causes Enki to be perplexed and say, "What is this?" So what I got from that, of course, is that it's this wrestling scene where this warrior, all he does is turns the feet of the opponent wrestling, and that causes shock to this this god who has set up this match, right? And ultimately, the warrior still loses, but merely having turned the feet of this opponent is enough to show how terrifyingly strong Ninurta actually is, because this is just a fragment, of course, but it seems like Enki thought he had set up an unfair match where he's just going to humble and defeat and put aside the threat of Ninurta. But Ninurta shows that he's actually incredibly powerful, incredibly strong, just by turning the feet of the opponent in this match. So that is the same, at least the core small part of that motif is what we have in the Thor myth. And once you see by other supports that Enki is like the Prajapati type, but a Prajapati type who is heavily emphasizing his trickster illusion sort of nature in Enki very much. Once you see that, you can kind of see this connection that's what Utgartha Loki actually is. And so Utgartha Loki sets up a wrestling match between Thor and the old hag, the old woman, who he thinks, Utgartha Loki thinks no one can defeat this old woman because she's actually old age. And Thor, bravely faces this old woman, and he is only able to turn her. Wait, okay. He is able to. Oh wait, okay. I'm combining the two different elements. Actually, he's able to lift the leg of the cat, which is Jormungandr. That's actually the parallel. In the fight
he's
against
brought down to one knee.
in the fight against the woman, he stops himself from being brought to one knee. So those are both similar motifs, definitely. But the actual parallel is to the cat, because the cat is Jormungandr, the serpent of the deeps, right? We have in this Enki story, it's a turtle made from the clay of the deeps. Absu is literally the deeps, which are the waters of the deep, right? So we have this. That's another interesting connection, because the cat, it's like a serpent versus a turtle. Those are like related types of animals, even sort of embodying the waters of the depths in a way. So that is just another piece connecting those. But then you have, Thor is able to only, lift only one paw of the cat, I think. Anyway,
Yeah, he's
check
only able
my.
to lift one paw.
Okay, I was flipping it in my head. I was like, is he able to lift 3 but not 4? But it's that he's able to lift one paw, and he is still defeated. He still kind of like loses that wrestling match. But when the story concludes, Utgartholoki says to him, "We were amazed, that it was terrifying when you lifted that one paw of the cat, because that is actually the serpent Jormungandr, and lifting one paw is this unheard of, impossible feat of strength that you did." So it strikes. You can
Yeah,
see
it
that
was
it
actually
strikes
dangerous, and he could have
perplexity.
destroyed the world.
Right, exactly. So let's see. That is in. Is that Gylfaginning or Skaldskaparmal? Maw? It must be.
I believe
Gylfaginning.
it's. I don't
Gylfaginning?
remember which one.
I'll just see if I can pull that up. Okay, here it is. Yeah, I've gotten pretty quick at switching things around here. So let's see. Oops, what is that? That's not what. Okay, I lied. Okay, here we go. So this is where Utgartholoki is revealing that he had done these illusions to Thor, and he says, "And again he said, It seemed to me not less noteworthy when thou didst lift up the cat, and to tell thee truly, then all were afraid who saw how thou didst lift 1 foot clear of the earth. That cat was not as it appeared to thee. It was the Midgard serpent, which lies about all the land, and scarcely does its length suffice to encompass the earth with head and tail. So high didst thou stretch up thine arms, that it was then but a little way more to heaven. It was also a great marvel concerning the wrestling match, when thou didst withstand so long." Okay, that's the old age one. So he kind of runs those stories together there. But yeah, you can see that let's see, so high didst thou stretch up thine arms, that it was then but a little way more to heaven. Okay, so yeah, you can see hopefully that those are similar. Just an interesting sidetrack point there. But we see that whole motif, as I go into in more detail, in this repeated story in many different Vedic texts, all circling around the humbling of Indra. So Indra becomes somehow restless, or what have you, thinks he is the most powerful in the land, or whatever it is, and he encounters this some figure who kind of embodies the godhead, and it's usually like we have like Brahma or Prajapati types, but sometimes there are variations where it's like Shiva or Vishnu themselves, like taking the form of Brahma or Prajapati. So it's
Yeah,
like
it's
it's
whoever that
yeah,
sectarian
exactly.
cult, not cult, but like it's whoever's the supreme being,
Yeah,
insert supreme being.
yeah,
No, it's not that
yeah,
much of a
exactly.
discrepancy.
Exactly. It's not. So whatever, the one of the godhead figures has to do this, and through disguises. It's usually through disguises and illusions, and there's frequently this theme of like causing the thunderer to strike a mountain. That's in the Krishna versions as well, where he uses a mountain to deflect the blow. And yeah, ultimately the thunderer gets humbled, but sort of shows his prowess at the same time. So that's how you can support this connection there. I just think it's pretty clear that Conchovar doesn't have any indication that he's like Shiva type or Vishnu type. He seems like a blatant and simple Prajapati type, to me at least, and that supports. And then when you look at the Vedic material, it's like there's more consistency around it being like Prajapati/Brahma, and then there's like variation where Shiva or Vishnu get brought in as well. So, but when you bring those together, it's like there's more consistency around this figure being Brahma/Prajapati type, I think. Especially when you look at Enki, he's most supported to be that type too. So yeah, you gotta weigh
Before
that.
you click off this page, though, I was reading something that makes me think of Beowulf even more.
Oh yeah.
right at the end of this middle paragraph where it says Thor sprang up and speedily, readily, and asked Hymir to let him roam to sea, but Hymir said that Thor would be of little help to him, being so small and a youth. I was talking with Huij earlier in the week about the etymology of Beowulf because I watched a video from a gentleman named Graham Shepard about a more likely theory that Beowulf doesn't mean Beowulf as a kenning for bear, but means something like barley wolf. And Huij was talking about how in Beowulf, when he was a youth, he was described as very unpromising when he was young. Um, and we can get into the name still being very relevant to the thunder god type, but that I hadn't remembered that detail from last I read it. And I'm just in my talks with people about Beowulf being modeled after Thor, and a lot of people not really agreeing with it. I'm just seeing more and more evidence for the fact that that's the case.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah, I can't comment on the etymological question there, but that is a fascinating possibility. And I definitely think, as we've gone into in this stream, there's a lot that connects Beowulf to the sort of Indra type and Thor himself. I think it was, well, let's see. Was it Mercian Thane might have brought up about the weapon of Beowulf doesn't seem overtly like a thunderer weapon, but he has a famous sword, at least one famous sword, if not more, right?
Yeah, so right before he goes to the aquatic lair to battle Grendel's mother, Unferth gives him his family heirloom sword named Hrunting,
Right.
and this weapon ends up failing him because it's not a magical weapon, which is the only kind of weapon that can pierce Grendel and or his mother's skin.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very similar to how Thor's hammer, in my opinion at least, Loki turns into a gadfly and bites the eye of the blacksmith, the dwarf blacksmith. I'm not, well, maybe. And causes a deficiency in Thor's hammer. Like it's too short.
Right.
It's very powerful, but it was supposed to be much longer.
Mm.
So yeah, but it's a sword and not a
Yeah,
handmade
I wanted
weapon.
to just bring into that question though that Fergus MacRoic, he actually has a famous sword, but we can connect it directly to the Vajra of Indra because first of all, when Fergus swings the sword over his head, it makes a rainbow. It makes the rainbow. So it's like that is a amazingly along with Fergus MacLecha's jaw being broken and killing the serpent, that's a blatant Indra connection, right? But then Fergus MacRoic has the sword that makes the rainbow. Well, the bow of Indra is said to be the rainbow, and then he also has his Vajra as another weapon. So he has a couple weapons, but he famously has a bow, and it is the rainbow. So he's the producer. He is the one who holds the rainbow weapon, essentially. So yeah, you can see that the sword of Fergus MacRoic can be directly connected to a Indra weapon right there. And then along with that, the etymology of Fergus's sword is essentially the same as the etymology of the Vajra, so the other weapon of Indra, the thunder or lightning weapon. So the weapon of Fergus MacRoic is Khaled Bolug, right? And this is the weapon that seemingly, it's one of the, well, okay, we're looking at an Irish source, right? And then you have like Excalibur in more British sources, of course, and there's interaction and there's a shared basis among the different traditions and all of that. But somehow the name Khaled Bolug seems to be related to the Excalibur later, right? At least theoretically. And Khaled Bolug means like hard point or hard notcher or something like that. And it has this word in there that just means like hard, like extremely hard as its etymology. The etymology of Vajra is that it's extreme hardness, and it's like that's why the word Vajra gets used to mean diamond as well, like diamond hardness. So I think when you combine the fact that it makes the rainbow with the fact that its etymology means hard, and that's the etymology of Indra's weapon, you're looking at an Irish sword that is fundamentally the Thunderer weapon, just changed to a sword at whatever point, right? But it's still, yeah. So it just tells you that in this legendary version, the Thunderer weapon can be shifted, what have you, to just a sword, but it's still from this Thunderer weapon root. And if that's the case, it could potentially, at least, be the case for Beowulf himself. He could have a sword that is mythologically coming from that Thunderer root potentially. So okay, that doesn't help us like to identify Beowulf as a Thunderer. Of course, you can't. It doesn't really help if it's not obvious connections, but you can. But this is just an argument that the sword could still originally have shared some connection to Thunderer weapons, if you follow that logic.
Yeah. I did find the posts I had saved about Ilya and Svyatogor. They're not very long. If you're
Oh yeah,
okay
go
with
into it.
reading them.
Yeah, absolutely.
So these are saved from a Telegram channel of a Ukrainian guy summarizing them in English. So it's not from the source itself. But I was skimming through them while you were going over Enki, and it's pretty good. So Ilya Muromets was a bogatyr, and they had a particular duty in defending the border of the land of the roots, which is very, very characteristic of the thunder god as a guardian of the boundary from outer forces, and also ties to his agricultural association. So right off the bat, he's very in line with the thunder character. And while he was patrolling the border, he suddenly heard loud snoring, and he follows the noise to see a giant horse carrying a giant warrior. Ilya called out to the giant, asking the giant to stop and name himself, but there was no response. Ilya shouted some more, warning the stranger that he will have to use force. After a couple more attempts, he charged and struck the horseman with all his might. But the horseman didn't even flinch while his gigantic mount kept riding away. Ilya's iron club was bent, so he had to take out a spear and charge the stranger again with the same result. After Ilya's third charge, the giant warrior woke up, complaining that the mosquitoes of the Ruslands were quite wild. He then finally noticed Ilya and raised him up and took a closer look. This is how the warrior Svyatogor and Ilya Muromets became friends. Svyatogor taught Ilya many things, realizing his potential as a bogatyr, or um, a guardian of the boundary, and they trained and lived in the mountains. As Ilya learns, Svyatogor, despite being by far the strongest and wisest warrior in the world, cannot really put his skills to good use since he is so heavy that the ground itself can't support his weight. So he only rides deep in the mountains, rarely visiting the very border. The name Svyatogor can be translated as Holy Mountain. The meta reason for this is, I guess, his input. I'm not going to read that. One day, Ilya and Svyatogor were riding in the mountains and found a strange coffin with a short text on its lid. The latter claimed that whoever fits, or sorry, the letters, he's mistyping, claimed that whoever fits inside the coffin is to lay in it. Ilya got inside the coffin, but it was too big for him. Then was Svyatogor's turn, and it was just right for him. The moment they realized it, the lid sealed itself, and Svyatogor could no longer get out. Ilya took his friend's giant sword and hit the lid with it, but with each strike, the coffin got covered with iron stripes. I'm not really sure what that means. After all attempts proved futile, Svyatogor spoke from the coffin. He asked Ilya to come closer and breathe in his last breaths. With each breath, Ilya got stronger. Svyatogor warned him not to take the last breath since it would make him as powerful as Svyatogor himself, and would be thus able to walk on land. And Ilya obeyed and did not breathe in his final breath. Ilya took Sviatogo's sword, leaving the coffin and the horse in the mountains. And that is essentially the end of what he wrote. But I'm sure
Hmm.
I don't think the Rus Galenas have been translated into English very often.
Yeah, I
So
mean
that
that,
was
that
what I had.
you can see that. Yeah, the mosquitoes like the mosquitoes must be plentiful around here or whatever he says. Um, and then I was wondering James if James could clarify about the connection to going into Screamer's glove, or if that connects to anything in that story we read. I'm not sure.
I don't know if the coffin would have been it, but what stood out to me was first of all the third successive charge is what gets his
Right,
attention, and
right,
then he warns Ilya not to breathe in his final breath because he will become too strong and destroy literally the earth, the ground, the world.
right, right. Good point.
Um,
That's so
yeah.
that reminds of just Thor moving the cat or drinking from the horn and doing these things that could disrupt the world with his strength. Is that the sort of
Mhm.
thing? Yeah, yeah. That's seems clear. Seems clear right there. So, um, oh, Ilya goes into Sviatogor's pocket. Okay, thank you, thank you. Okay, fascinating. Ilya goes into Sviatogor's pocket. So,
He also was learning from him for a long time, kind of like how Indra and Vairochana, the chief of the demons, go to um, Prajapati, who acts as a guru to them
hmm,
in one version of the Indian humbling myth. But yeah, the only other thing I can think of about the thunder god is like the agricultural stuff, which is pretty simple that we haven't
right.
gotten into.
True, true. So on this Sviatogor, so I mean, it's just interesting to me because the Prajapati type god is like this Axis Mundi god. He like picture Atum rising as the mound from the waters. So therefore, he's identified with the sacred mound, which is the same as the holy mountain, the sacred mountain. So, anyways, it's a perfect name, I think, for Sviatogor. If he is taking that sort of Prajapati role, it makes sense when you have that framework. Um,
Yeah, and I'm kind of beginning to think this is an example where some versions of this myth reveal the godhead behind the giant disguise.
yeah,
Some versions don't.
yeah,
But it makes me think of other myths within Germanic mythology, outside of Germanic mythology, where there are kind of mysterious, powerful giants like this that are the gods, or particularly the thunder god, have to face. If those could all be understood theologically as disguises for the trickster high god,
well,
as you
I would say it's highly, highly plausible, and it could be different aspects and seen in different ways. But I think it was sort of a genre of these mystical like beings or even giants who you're not really seeing their true who they really are, and it's I think this was sort of a genre. There's more of that type of story than we might at first realize, right? It's interesting. There are different there are some in the Celtic, even like in the Finn material that I think of, which are sort of these mystical encounters. And even though Finn is like the most esoteric god, he'll have these encounters even, like the hospitality of what was it called? I'm trying to remember if the name was Kuana or something like that. The House of Kuana. Anyways, we won't go into that. I don't want to sidetrack too much, but I would just agree that there are more of these type of mystical stories where a giant could be more than what they seem. It makes perfect sense when you think about it, like the way fairy tales work and the way myths work as well. It's not going to be always what it seems on the surface, and that's kind of the fun of it sometimes. Um, there's another version that is interesting where it's actually Bhima, and when Bhima again is the incarnation of Vayu, the wind god, the other warrior aspect, but who also parallels Thor. like we said, because Thor actually parallels Indra and Vayu. Bhima is the more brute force one with like the incredible appetite. That's like he's wolf bellied and he eats and drinks an incredible amount. But when Bhima first meets Hanuman, who he learns later, I think is his brother or half brother or something like that. But when he first comes upon Hanuman, he's this giant monkey in the wilderness somewhere. He doesn't know who he is, and he's like, tries to move. I think he's like sleeping or something. He tries to like move Hanuman's body, and he's unable to. So it's this similar confrontation where he doesn't know the identity of this giant being, and like he thinks he's the strongest guy in the world. Bhima does, and he tries to move him, and he's unable to. And then he like tries to confront him, and like he's overpowered in some way by Hanuman. I forget the details. And then in the conclusion of it, Hanuman like tells him like we're brothers actually, like, and then they become they're friends after that. Once he realizes his identity, so that seemed to be like the same genre of story, right? Especially especially the things where Bhima, like his strength is futile against this giant, and so that made me think that this motif could kind of float between different warrior gods, or they could each have a version of it with a different esoteric meaning as well. So there's different
Yeah, I was
possibilities
kind of
with that.
thinking that.
Yeah,
There's also like there's more than one event in Thor's life where he's kind of either humiliated or humbled with
right,
Harbard, his father in disguise, insulting him, and then also when he is trapped under Hrungnir's corpse and has to be rescued by his son. So
right.
yeah, it could be true that each god has like their own version of a humbling myth, and they have more than one humbling event.
Hmm.
It's completely
Yeah,
plausible.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, like it could have its own unique place in the theology or whatever. It could have a different role as well. It doesn't have to be just like completely interchangeable, but at the same time, certain motifs could kind of be interchanged in different traditions. So it's interesting to look at. Okay, what else do we want to say before we're done here? Does anyone have any questions they want to bring up in the chat or?
I can just bring up real quick
Yeah.
if it's all right. I didn't cover, we didn't really explicitly talk about one of the most basic characteristics of the thunder god is he's like a ward against benign spirits that would threaten agricultural fertility.
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's one of the biggest things. That's his main thing, more so than being a god of thunder, which he isn't always. Is being a guardian of the boundary. And the only other god besides Vayu that we have noticed he gets kind of mixed with a little bit, particularly in Greek mythology, is Vishnu, who is the boundary. So it kind of makes sense that they have a little bit of overlap there, but it's not
Yeah. That's a
all
great
the
point.
time.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Yeah. So like in the, if people go back and look at the little segment of the chart we had Ares / Heracles, but we would also include Achilles in that. And that's Ares and Achilles are kind of like an Indra Vishnu. But going back to the agricultural sort of guardian, there is a more likely etymology for Beowulf's name that's becoming a bit more popular since Graham Shepard made his video. And I trust Queege on Germanic etymology, and he agrees with it, that Beowulf doesn't mean Beowulf, but instead barley wolf. And it would still make sense in this. I mean, even if it did mean Beowulf, that is a kenning for bear, and that is like, bears love honey, just like the thunder god is like an alcoholic for mead.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So either way, they can work.
Right.
But yeah, that's part of why Mars is really a thunder god as well. And then also Ninurta was usually by the Greeks syncretized with Saturn because of like agricultural associations, but it seems through myths and even having a special talking weapon and the agricultural associations he has is a lot more like Thor or Indra.
Right. Yeah, and I should say, we were thinking about doing a part 2 on for the Thunderer, focusing more on the Mediterranean deities when Josephus has some time for that. I think it seemed like a good way to do it. So yeah, we could go into that some more on those. Verithragnia is interesting because this is the Ironic equivalent. And what's interesting is that the Ironic tradition still has Indra. They still have the name Indra, but he's mentioned or classified among the devas, which are the demons, right? So he's become explicitly grouped among the demons and basically not given a mythos, a full mythos, and instead we have a different. So it's like they still have Indra, they still have the name, but they have a different figure who's kind of like filled the slot of Indra, and he's specifically mentioned like riding along with Mithra and stuff like that. And his name is Verithragnia. But Verithragnia seems to come from um, sort of like the same origin as one of the epithets of Indra. And that epithet of Indra is Vritrahana. And Vritrahana means Vritra killer. And Vritra can mean just like obstacle as well. It's Vritra is the serpent, but it also means like obstacle. So Indra is the smasher of obstacles, the smasher of Vritra. So anyways, this epithet of Indra basically means like the killer, the smasher of obstacles and obstructions. And this name Verithragnia in the Ironic sphere comes from a shared origin with that word Vritrahana, Verithragnia. It's the same elements basically, but in Avestan language. So you end up with this figure who is the smasher of obstacles, the overcomer of obstacles, and he seems to sort of fill this slot that Indra has left behind. But at the same time, he comes from an epithet that is, at least in the Vedic material, is given to Indra. And clearly the Thunderer is the smasher of like the serpent. So it must have been archaically a Thunderer epithet, I think, something like that. So you can see like it's kind of strange. I think that they still have Indra, but then they've like replaced him with just an epithet of the Indra type. It seems like, and then even more on top of that, Verithragnia, the word becomes just it becomes a word that means like victory, that just embodies victory, because you can see logically that the overcoming of obstacles, the overcoming obstructions equals victoriousness, right? That is kind of, it becomes run together with the concept of victory in itself. So then Verithragnia then symbolizes victory in himself. And so when he rides along with Mithra, it's like Mithra riding along with victory. And his name is just translated as victory there. So that's interesting. And it's like Zeus being along with Nike, victory. So those concepts run together where he turns into like the god of victory. And then he doesn't have the same like dragon slaying types of myths as far as I know. So it's a bit complex. But then we have a legendary version that seems to, let's see. Okay, it gets really complicated. I probably shouldn't go into it too much. This is something that Dumazil has written on a lot, and it's one of the more confusing, complicated pieces because you have this other figure named Thraetona, and Thraetona is like connected to Trita, who's this other dragon slayer, right? Thraetona, Trita, the names are connected, and then there is somehow a connection between Thraetona and Thraetona becomes Feredun in the epic material of the Shahnameh. Feredun is then compared and connected with like Verithragnia in by Dumazil and others. So you can see how that's basically too complicated to go into how that works, and it's even unclear among scholars. So I won't go into that too much more. But Verithragnia, I just wanted to outline that problem that's there in the Ironic material, which is that we do have this figure who's connected to Indra by his name, definitely, but they also have Indra as a demonized presence. So there are mysteries there about how that developed that can be explored further, of course. Okay, so then Mars. Okay, we'll go into that in the future. Mars is a pretty straightforward thunder, and we'll hopefully go into that. Okay, I should mention that we have the Irish figure Turin, right? Tuireann, and we've already gone into Fergus, but Fergus is in the legendary layer. Essentially, he's in the Ulster cycle and related sort of legendary material. And so, when you go deep enough into this, as we have tried to do, it becomes clear that the Ulster cycle stuff is really preserving a lot of mythic material to begin with, Cuchulainn especially, just preserves so many Vishnu motifs and myths that it's acceptable to treat it like mythology, with the caveat that it is a legendary representation. So therefore, it's okay to treat Fergus as this legendary representation of myth. He is the Thunderer. He's really fully preserving and representing the Thunderer mythos, especially the dragon slaying myth, because that really is the fullest version of that myth that we have for the Irish, at least. And really, probably, if you compare it to the Welsh stuff, it's still probably like the fullest direct comparison to Thor's battle with the serpent and Indra's battle with Vritra. It's there in the legendary material of Fergus. But then you also do have traces of the thunder in like what we would call the mythological layer as well among the Tuatha Dé Danann. And so this seems most plausibly to be Turin. And Turin is this word that seems to be a sort of riff or a development off of the thunderer name that would connect to like Taran and Tyrannus that we see elsewhere. But Turin actually is kind of it basically it's what you would say like that in a poetic tradition of poets using these names. It's too close to Taran to really write off and think that there's no connection, but it's also like slightly a different word or different name. So then you have to show mythologically that there are connections. And what has made sense to me, thus far at least, is the fact that Turin has a mythos that can be paralleled to Arjuna, who we discussed a lot, and even potentially to like Achilles, who embodies some of the thunder mythos in his story. So that gets a bit complex comparing to these epic heroes, but that's where I would start with that, because Arjuna has this story about his son Abhimanyu, and Abhimanyu is, Arjuna's beloved son, and they're fighting this war, and Abhimanyu gets sent on this mission to sort of go behind enemy lines and engage the enemy and all of that. And at this moment, when he's sent on this mission, Arjuna is like on the other side of the battlefield, like far away, where he can't come aid them. And so Abhimanyu, I think, gets surrounded, gets kind of surprised from behind when he has gone on this mission behind enemy lines, and he gets surrounded and outnumbered and all of that stuff, and gets killed. Abhimanyu then is taken and he's given a funeral pyre, and Arjuna comes back from his fighting and learns that his son has been killed, and he approaches the funeral pyre and basically is like breaking down, grieving over the funeral pyre and saying, if I don't get revenge on the one who killed you this very day, before this day ends, then I will throw myself upon the pyre with you and kill myself, basically, from grief. And so that, obviously he doesn't kill himself in that story. He goes and seeks revenge instead. What we have and this I've argued is similar in some of its motifs to Achilles and Patroclus, actually. Patroclus is not his Achilles' son. Instead, he's a member of Achilles' household. He's like, he is not a blood family member, but he is part of Achilles' household, and he's like a mentor of Achilles within that household, who's been like adopted into the family or hired or whatever it is. And so, and then they're like, extremely close friends in the way that they are. And then when Patroclus, of course, gets sent on a similar mission, kind of where he ends up behind enemy lines and gets surrounded by the enemy and killed, and then Achilles grieves over the pyre, and that sets him off to finally go back into battle after he's been holding out. This triggers him to go finish the war, and that leads directly to his own death, Achilles' own death, because if Achilles had just stayed out of the battle, he wouldn't have fulfilled his destiny to go die in battle, right? So Patroclus's death triggers Achilles to fulfill his destiny, which leads to his own death, right? And to go attack and go seek revenge. He's essentially seeking revenge for what has happened to Patroclus in a lot of ways, among other things. This is similar to the story of Turin, because Turin is, in a feud with the sovereign. Okay, Achilles is in a feud with the sovereign, Agamemnon. That's why he's holding out at this moment. He has this feud based around, the captured women and the spoils of war. And Achilles is holding out in the battle, but it's created this conflict, this massive rift between him and the commander-in-chief, Agamemnon, who is the real king, sovereign. And this is fundamental to the Thunderer, by the way. I go into this. This is fundamental. We've already noted how the Thunder Warrior, is like this presence who could overtake the sovereign. So that creates this fundamental tension between the castes, the functions. The warrior caste is in tension with the sovereign. They have to help each other. They have to work together to make society work. But there's this threat that the warrior caste will overtake or challenge against the sovereign, right? That's fundamentally what's happening in the Iliad with Achilles and Agamemnon. That also happens with Arjuna and Yudhishthira, where it is a little more indirect and complicated, but it involves Yudhishthira causing an insult to Arjuna, basically surrounding Arjuna's bow, and I won't go into the details right now because I don't remember every detail. Similar to this sort of rift, though, that happens between Achilles and Agamemnon. So in the Irish version, Turin it's this unstated feud, this tension between the family of Turin and the family of Lu, and also his father, Cian. And so as this sort of feud is already ongoing, Cian gets killed, gets seen by the sons of Turin. Cian, that's the father of Lu, he gets seen by the sons of Turin, and they chase him and kill him. And he like transforms into an animal, and I think he transforms into a pig. There's different versions. There's actually an issue with like the way the word of what animal he turns into. There's a whole issue there that I went into. But he turns into like a pig or a dog, and he gets killed by the sons of Turin, further inflaming this feud between the families, right? So in retribution for that, Lu says, your sons have to be punished for killing my father, obviously. So he sends them on a suicide mission, basically. What we don't know quite yet that it's a suicide mission, but in the end of the story, we realize that it's been a suicide mission, basically, that he's sending them on. But he sends them out to retrieve these impossible or very difficult to retrieve items and do these incredibly hard tasks. They do them, they retrieve these items, and on the final one, they have to do these shouts on this hill. And the outcome is they are mortally wounded in the last task, because there is a confrontation involving that last task, and they are they are mortally wounded, and they bring back this fur or this skin that they've retrieved, which has this magical healing property. And but they're like mortally wounded, and they ask Lou if they can use the healing properties of what they've retrieved, and he basically says no, and forces them, to die for what they've done. They don't get any uh, ultimate mercy from Lou in that. So the sons of Turin die from this suicide mission that Lou has sent them on, and then we get this final scene where Turin goes to his dead sons and basically grieves over them, weeps over them until he himself dies. So this seems like, when you have the framing of like the rivalry of the warrior, of the Thunderer with the Sovereign as this framework that recurs, it seems like too many things. Even though there's vast differences of how it plays out, it's still this like they are sent, sort of on this suicide mission, similar to the way Patroclus or Abhimanyu are kind of sent out on these dangerous missions, and then result in them dying, and then the Thunderer figure grieves powerfully over them. Basically, like Arjuna says, I'm going to throw myself on the fire and die myself if I can't gain revenge. But Turin, in his story, simply grieves over them until he dies. I also thought it was at least plausible that Turin, this outpouring of grief, like grieving and weeping until you die, it's like an image of a thundercloud almost to me. At least this could be a stretch, but like it's like when you see the thunderclouds raining down their rain, they rain themselves out until they dissipate. It's like that could be this image of the grieving Thunderer weeping over his sons. It's entirely possible that there was a sort of weather connection there, or that could be not connected. It's hard to say.
That does not sound like a stretch. That sounds pretty, especially since he's named Thunder.
Yeah, especially since he's named Thunder, basically. And again, it's like it could be a play on words. It's not quite the word thunder is the issue there. So some people have used that as a criticism, that it's not etymologically exactly the same as Tyrannus, or at least the spelling and stuff is hard to trace directly to it. There's more. I actually go into, I think, the details of that in my video on that. So I won't bring up details that I don't have perfectly memorized on that issue. But yeah, so when you look at the picture, the scene like of Arjuna grieving over his son who has died, he's the father who grieves over his son's pyre in this dramatic moment as one of his key motifs. That motif carries through to Achilles in a different way, and then that's what Turin is doing. So to me, that's a strong enough through line that it's like the strongest parallel that I've found for any mythical figure tying to an Indra type, and he just happens to have this name Turin, which you really can't write off as being, you can't write that off without more evidence that is not like a variation on the Thunderer name, I think, because you have the Welsh Taran, and you have Tyrannus and stuff. So it is by far the most plausible figure who is the Indra mythos. Now, I should say, along with this, another thing that I've been looking at recently is that some of the things that the sons of Turin are sent to do, those are actually similar to the trials of Heracles. Okay, so now we're looking at the sons also potentially carrying through Thunderer type motifs that connect to Heracles. So when you look at that, it's like, okay, like maybe like there's a circle around like the father and the sons extending that mythos. That could potentially reinforce the fact that we're close to the target here, right? If the sons have motifs connected to Heracles, then you can kind of see circling around the father and the sons is like a parallel to the Indra type. I think is pretty strong. And yeah, even with that, even like the shouts on the hill and stuff like that, was reminiscent of the hill was reminiscent of Vala, who Indra and Brihaspati both fight. Vala is this other serpent who is like embodies like a mountain or stone enclosure and like a cave enclosure that they have to break open to free um the light and the cows and stuff like that. And that could be like this story of the sons having this confrontation on a hill with a certain name, certain linguistic connections that I didn't really go too much into that for this stream, or prepare too much for that for this stream. But it's something that you guys can look at in the future. That could have some connection to the confrontation with like the cave / mound serpent as well. Yeah, I wish there's more that can maybe in the part 2. I will prepare some of the comparisons to the Heracles trials, because that's something to really look at. Heracles has these trials he's sent on, right? That reminds already of the sons of Turin being sent on these trials that are like these impossible tasks, with some of the elements aligning. I think the sons of Turin, one of their tasks is to retrieve like the golden apples. So that's like similar to what Heracles has to do, right? And so there's more there that we can maybe draw that into the next part, so I can be more specific on that. 12 labors of Heracles. Thank you. Yeah, so we'll plan to go into that more next time, and I think that kind of draws things together. Please watch my video on the Celtic Thunderer, because I also go into how Sir Kai of the Arthurian material is this very, very strong, actually, Thunderer embodiment, Thunderer figure. He fights this cat, this like Cath Palug, right? Who is like, he's like this aquatic cat monster. But Thor fights a cat who is actually a disguised aquatic monster. So it's like you can see that this aquatic cat that Sir Kai fights is probably this like serpent monster in his cat form, things like that. And I go into that more in the video on that material. And then we have Taran in the Welsh material, and more specifically, Taran's son is mentioned fighting in the war. So it's once again the fact that this Taran or Turin has like a son who's actually kind of taking a central role, because Taran himself doesn't appear in the Welsh material. He doesn't appear in his own presence, so to speak. He's just mentioned as the father of one of the combatants in the war, who's the son of Taran. So then it makes you think like, okay, maybe in the Celtic material, the son of Taran, like the sons of Turin, had been pushed sort of into a prominent role there. Any final or further thoughts before we wrap this one up, Arno?
I was thinking that maybe the Irish is a bit more conservative with it's the sons of the Thunderer who the Thunderer weeps for.
Mm-hmm.
Because Achilles' son seems to be a continuation of his Vishnu side. I would say his son Neoptolemus is like the Bora male to Cuchulainn being Achilles, I guess. So maybe that was just something that switched around with the Indra Vishnu composite you had there, but that could be gone through another time.
Yeah. But, Another interesting thing about it is Achilles is the one whose shade is confronted. Okay, more than one figure's shade is actually spoken to or speaks in the Homeric tradition, right? But one of the main ones is Achilles is spoken to, I think, by Odysseus, right, when he goes into the underworld, and Achilles talks to him a bit. what's interesting is that it's Fergus's shade, rather, who is confronted in the Toynbee to tell the tale of the Toyn, or to tell some portion of it. So Fergus has actually died, and it's like this frame element where Fergus's shade is called upon and tells some of the story. Okay, so that was interesting in a sort of parallel to Achilles as well, I thought.
Fargus also drags the body of Etar Kubal in the same way that Achilles does
Oh
Hector's
yeah,
body.
great point. No, that's
But
that.
yeah,
See,
that's
that's
just another
strong.
minor detail.
Yeah,
But
yeah. No, that's
it's the same way. It's like cow sinews being tied through their heels.
wow.
Like
Wow, that's amazing. No, yeah, that's something I hadn't noticed. So I think you might have mentioned that before, but it's something
someone put it on
that's
Twitter.
okay. Very cool. Yeah. So yeah, I do think it's important. Like people will often say like Cuchulainn is reminiscent of Achilles, and that's obviously true in some ways. But I think we need to bring in this Fergus element as well, because people don't realize that Fergus is really this thunderer type, and so that kind of gets missed, I think, because of the prominence of Cuchulainn. It needs to be seen that this sort of split between them. It's very similar. Fergus's relation to Cuchulainn is very comparable to Indra's relation to Vishnu, because Vishnu is called Upendra, or Little Indra. So they are actually, that's an esoteric circle around Indra and Vishnu, even in the Vedic material, that they are extensions in at least a certain type of role. And then in the Roman material, you've got Terminus and Mars as being like overlapping. You'll have like Mars Terminus, or you'll have Terminus and Mars together in this certain role that Roger Woodard goes into a lot in his book, Indo-European Sacred Spaces. Regardless, yeah, you have this situation, and you have Fergus as one of like the main foster fathers of Cuchulainn, and so in this father position, and then they're sort of like friends, but then they have to like fight each other, or their armies have to face each other because they end up on opposite sides of the war. That's all very interesting. And I also found it interesting once you start looking at this, things just kind of like follow after this train of thought, because there is a certain point where Fergus finds himself on the opposite side of his relatives, and he's originally from the Ulster side more, but then he ends up fighting for the Connacht side, and so yeah, there's a point where he's expressing his sort of like remorse that he has to fight his own kinsmen and his own friends, that the people of the place where he is from, actually, because he's been.
That's the irony of Thor.
And that's the. Is there a specific thing with Thor that aligns with?
Well, his mother is an Etin, and he is a famous Etin slayer.
Oh, true. Okay, great point. The other thing that I was going to say is that is the core, like, number one conflict for Arjuna. Again, Arjuna, because Arjuna, the whole war is about cousins fighting cousins, right? And Arjuna has this moment of despair, of despondency, and hesitancy, action paralysis, where he is like, I don't want to fight my kinsmen, essentially, my cousins, and that is the basis of the whole Bhagavad Gita, because then Krishna has to appear to him and explain to him that this is all fated, and that you have to take action, you have to fulfill your duty and your dharma, even though you've been placed on this side of the war. Everything is fated as it will be. It's all essentially, you are an instrument of fate, and so just do your duty, and it is all part of the Godhead's will, so to speak. And yeah, so that is the fundamental thing that Arjuna, the incarnation of the thunder, shows remorse for, and that you have it right there with Fergus in a different permutation, I think. So just more and more things sort of confirming this identity, so that you can really see, I think, that Fergus is a pretty, like, I think there's always going to be overlap between Vayu and Indra traits, even probably in Fergus, no matter where you look. But Fergus is a pretty darn good, like, just Indra type, just Thunderer type motifs, it seems like. I don't know. It's there at different times I've thought there's like more Vayu, maybe some Vayu comparisons there. But I think for the most part, it's a pretty good picture of an Indra type on his own. We'll go into Heracles and stuff, and I definitely think Heracles is like a combination of wind and thunder motifs, but we'll hopefully go into that next time. All right, so yeah, so hopefully that made some sense and was interesting, and this is really important in like distinguishing the Thunderer type from Lu, as we're continually trying to do, because it is a confusion, it is an error to just think that because Lu has certain similarities, certain traits connected to lightning and thunder, that he would be then this Indra type, the thunder. It's not the same thing, because as we've tried to get across, different figures can have the thunder or lightning, but that's not core to being the thunderer, because the lightning kind of appears with multiple gods. It gets passed around. The sons of Turin are forced to retrieve this fire spear for Lu. To me, that's always read as like the Thunderer's family being forced by the sovereign to give him the lightning. It's like, I'm the real one in charge of the lightning. I'm gonna like impose my sovereign power and show that I'm the real ruler of the skies in that myth, in a way, at least. That's one reading you could take from that, but it still shows you the Thunderer family being the ones who provide the lightning, and like the ones who originate or retrieve it, if that fire spear is a lightning symbol, at least. So but that shows like the overlap of the lightning and thunderer role with the sovereign, and it also shows the important division and distinction, and that they're always kind of like in a tension with each other, the thunderer warrior and the sovereign, and the lightning is part of this sort of dispute and the overlap of their roles even. Okay, so yeah, I think unless you have any final thoughts, we can wrap up on that point.
No, it's pretty much fine. I guess maybe I can at least mention so that I remember next time. I was thinking of Iolaus, Treta Aptia, Thraitona, or Faradun as like other examples of Vishnu as Upendra.
Oh yeah,
but we can get into that later. I just wanted to make sure that was in my head.
Yeah, it's fascinating. It's a fascinating issue for sure. I do find that issue fascinating, and also, like I said, it gets very confusing and hard to like splice apart exactly. So it can be hard to discuss. But definitely,
would you be okay with me quickly recapping the points of like the main sort of like narrative myth
of which figure
of the Thunder God, like just mainly the fight
right now, to summarize and conclude the stream, right? Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
go for it. That sounds good.
Okay, so I think this is super important just because of how many people I've seen confused, including myself in the past, and like it's not like a crazy thing. It's just more of like we're realizing these stories that get called Chaos Kampf are a lot more nuanced, and that every god is going to have Mithra also wields the Vaza, just like Arthur also has Caliburg.
Yeah, and this was a great point. Yeah, I thought this was summarized.
Yep. And with the Thunderer specifically, he has two encounters. The first one, he is unprepared in some way. With Beowulf and Dobrynya, they're like naked and all that. Even in Dobrynia's story, the dragon lands in the river where he's bathing and separates him from his weapons. He's not able to get to him. So he's unprepared in some way. He's caught off guard, caught in a moment of weakness and humiliated, incurs a sin. And unless this god is the king of the gods in the mythology, when they battle again the second time, it is a mutual killing. And usually he liberates the waters, and he's the god of the rising tide. And it's a bit different from other gods' chaos comps with their own monsters, and it's not the same as Zeus and Typhon. It's not the same as the dog, and the octopus. It's its own thing and it has its own particular meaning, and I think it's important to keep that in mind. And that's also very like once you know that, you can read it everywhere where it exists in other lores and mythologies. It's very apparent.
Right. Yeah, great summary. And I will say we can go, if we do a Vayu stream, we can go into other side of Thor, the things that weren't accounted for. Because like I said, there is this fundamental blending of the sides, which I think it just shows that was acceptable theologically or esoterically from early on. Like they didn't see a problem with a single god having those two sides to him, and then in other versions, those two sides splitting apart into their own wind versus thunder mythos. So I don't think they really worried too extensively about whether those things like overlapped or not. You know what I mean? But we will go into how other parts of Thor parallel the Dagva, and the Dagva is this wind aspect, this wind side, and really, the octopus that the Dagva slays is much more like when Thor fights Gyalp and her sister, and so this is something unexpected that I think is fascinating, and we will go into in the future if we are so lucky to have a chance to. So, all right, that sums it up. The Indra, the dragon slayer, the serpent slayer, the water monster slayer, who has the weapon which is connected to thunder, but also the rainbow, as with Fergus, connected to extreme hardness. He himself is connected to manly vigor, manliness. Fergus's name means like manly property or something, and Indra is excessively referred to as like embodying all the manly powers, manliness, and he's in this tension with the sovereign, so much so that it seems like he actually did overtake the sovereigns in the Vedic religion, it seems. And that fact, a historical fact of his taking the prominence, I think has caused confusion in some comparative mythology. So hopefully people can look at this and think it through and start to see the distinctions more clearly over time. All right. And thank you to everyone for listening today. And we will be back with more, hopefully, on this topic in the future. And Arno, thank you for discussing with me. I think that was great.
Yep. Thanks for having me on.
All right.
Good one.
Okay. Have a good one, everyone. Okay. Goodbye.